just minutes, the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami devastated Japan. Entire towns were swallowed by towering waves. A nuclear crisis loomed at Fukushima. Nearly 20,000 lives were lost in a tragedy that shook the world. But how did this catastrophic earthquake unfold? And why did it trigger such a massive tsunami, leaving devastation on a scale rarely seen in human history? Japan, straddling the Pacific Ring of Fire, is no stranger to earthquakes. 4 tectonic plates converge beneath the island nation, their constant grinding and shifting a source of seismic activity. In 869 CE, a massive megathrust earthquake unleashed its fury on the soil of Sendai Plain, sending walls of water crashing inland. Scientists studying the Earth's layers of tsunami deposits buried in the plain and discovered a chilling pattern. 3 devastating waves in 3,000 years, each separated by 800 to 1,100 years of silence. By 2001, it had been over 1,100 years since the last tsunami. In 2007, seismologists calculated the odds. A 99% chance of a major earthquake, magnitude 8.1 or greater, within 3 decades. It's only a matter of time before another mega quake happens. The afternoon of March 11th started peacefully along Japan's northeastern coast. Children attended school. Fishermen set out to sea. And at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant, workers conducted routine tasks. None of them knew that deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, a disaster of unimaginable scale was about to be unleashed. At 2:46 p.m. on March 11, 2011, the ground begins to shake. At first, it's gentle, almost imperceptible. Then, within seconds, the world erupts into chaos. The violent shaking intensifies, growing stronger with each passing moment. Japan's advanced earthquake early warning system springs into action. Over 1,000 seismometers detect the initial tremors, and within a minute, warnings blare across the nation. In Tokyo, 373 kilometers from the epicenter, millions receive alerts seconds before the shaking reaches them, potentially saving countless lives. In Sendai, Emma, an English teacher, later recounts, "I was heading downstairs to print something off in the classroom when I began to hear alarms going off on the teachers' mobile phones, the early warning signal sent out by the meteorological agency to herald an imminent earthquake. From that moment, we had just seconds before the shaking began, slowly at first, then ramping up to terrifying violence. Adults were shouting at each other to switch off the gas supply, and we could hear the children screaming upstairs. As I crouched on the floor under my desk, my head kept thumping the underside of the table as the floor buckled beneath me. Through the window, I could see the tops of the trees on the other side of the playing field shaking back and forth with the force of the quake. For 6 endless minutes, the earth roared. Buildings sway, roads crack, and bridges groan under the strain.
It all started at the epicenter near Sendai, 230 miles northeast of Tokyo.
It registered as a magnitude 9.0 to 9.1 earthquake, the most powerful in Japan's recorded history, and the 4th strongest globally since modern seismographs began. The epicenter lies just 72 kilometers east of the Yoshika Peninsula, but its effects are felt across the entire nation. As the dust settles and the earth falls silent, Japan finds itself transformed. The earthquake, however, was merely the first act in a cascade of disasters that would reshape the nation. The sea was retreating at an alarming rate, exposing the ocean floor. They knew what this meant, but even their worst fears couldn't prepare them for the monster that was about to be unleashed.
The resulting earthquake sends an enormous burst of energy up through the ocean, displacing enormous quantities of water. With the upward motion, a series of waves expands in all directions. In deep water, these waves travel fast, up to 500 miles an hour, but only reach a height of a few feet. A passing ship might not even notice. But as the waves enter shallow waters, friction with the ocean floor lowers the wave's speed, but raises their height.
The sudden displacement of massive volumes of water created a series of tsunami waves, racing towards Japan's eastern coastline at mind-boggling speeds of up to 700 kilometers per hour. It was as if the entire Pacific Ocean had been weaponized against the island nation. As the tsunami approached land, its speed slowed, but its height grew. What started as a barely noticeable rise in sea level quickly became a towering wall of water, laden with debris and carrying the destructive force of 1,000 freight trains. In Miyako, the wave would reach an almost inconceivable height of 40.5 meters, higher than a 12-story building.
Video of a tsunami wave approaching the shoreline. In Japan, some tsunami waves reached as far as 3 miles inland.
Masao Takeda, a man in his 70s, living with his wife in Higashi Matsushima City, watched in disbelief as a wave engulfed his neighborhood. My wife wanted to take the dog with us, but I convinced her that we would worry about the dog once we ensure our safety. She had gone back to get the dog from our house, but our house was swept away by the tsunami. My guess is that she was swept away too. If I realized beforehand, I could have stopped her from running back. I can't regret it enough. She is still missing.
New technology left an enormous amount of visual evidence for study in years to come, and can perhaps help us better understand the power of earthquakes and tsunamis.
The tsunami's raw power was on full display as it obliterated everything in its path, turning cars into projectiles and reducing buildings to splinters. In the city of Ishinomaki, residents who thought they were on high enough ground to avoid danger soon found themselves fighting for their lives. The tsunami inundated areas previously considered safe, catching many off guard. One survivor barely escaped through a window, only to be swept away by the oily, smelly torrent. In Ishinomaki, minutes before, waves up to 30 meters high swept in. Kurosawa, then aged 40, had scrambled 10 feet up a pine tree, wrapped his legs around a branch, and hung on for dear life. I felt like the ocean was all around me. The water was so cold it chilled me to the bone, he recalls. As the water came up to his knees, Kurosawa saw people in cars gripping their steering wheels as their vehicles were washed down the road. Others who had been hanging on to trees felled by the waves were swept away. Kurosawa endured sub-zero temperatures until rescue attempts were made. As the water receded, it left behind a landscape transformed. A 670-kilometer stretch of coastline lay in ruins. Cities like Ishinomaki suffered catastrophic loss of life. The tsunami had claimed far more victims than the earthquake itself, contributing to the staggering death toll of 19,759. As Japan began the long process of recovery, the world watched and learned, recognizing that the next impossible disaster might be just around the corner. As the tsunami's devastation unfolded along Japan's coast, a silent catastrophe was brewing at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant.
Daiichi nuclear power plant was the most powerful to strike Japan since records began. The workers stayed calm because they knew Japanese power plants are designed to withstand earthquakes.
The earthquake had severed the facility's connection to the power grid, leaving it reliant on backup generators. When the tsunami's 14-meter waves crashed over the plant's seawall, designed to withstand only 5.7 meters, those generators were submerged and rendered useless. Inside the plant, a desperate race against time began. Without power to cool the reactor cores, temperatures began to rise dangerously. Plant workers, led by shift supervisor Masao Yoshida, found themselves battling an invisible enemy as radiation levels skyrocketed. "We were in uncharted territory," Yoshida later recalled. "Every decision could mean life or death." Their mission is to find ways to vent the reactor without the assistance of electricity.
The reactor core was creating massive amounts of radioactive steam and hydrogen. The resulting pressure meant the workers could not get water onto the reactor without electricity. They didn't know how to do it.
As hours ticked by, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Hydrogen gas, a byproduct of the overheating fuel rods, began to accumulate inside the reactor buildings.
It exploded. Lumps of concrete came ripping through the roof of the Jeep.
On March 12th, the unthinkable happened. Unit 1 exploded, followed by Unit 3 on March 14th and Unit 4 on March 15th. The world watched in horror as plumes of radioactive material billowed into the air.
Firefighters now had to lay the hose by hand, taking radiation readings as they went.
Finally, the Japanese government decided to pump seawater into the reactors to cool them down with the main force inside the plant led by Masao Yoshida. And it worked. His actions were instrumental in preventing what could have been a disaster 10 times worse than Chernobyl. Megumi, a resident living near the plant, described the chaos. Helicopters were hovering, sirens were wailing, and an announcer kept shouting that we must evacuate. The Japanese government quickly ordered evacuations, first for those within a 3-kilometer radius, then expanding to 10 kilometers, and finally to 20 kilometers. Over 100,000 people were forced to flee their homes, many never to return. The disaster's impact stretched far beyond the immediate vicinity. Radioactive iodine and cesium were detected in tap water across several prefectures, including Tokyo. Contamination spread to food products, shaking public confidence and devastating local agriculture. Even years later, farmers in Fukushima struggled to overcome the stigma associated with their produce.
Two hours had passed since the tsunami. The coastline was devastated. Around 20,000 people were dead or missing.
As the immediate crisis subsided, the long-term challenges became apparent. Vast areas around the plant remained uninhabitable, with radioactive hotspots discovered as far away as Tokyo. The plant itself became a complex cleanup site, with no easy solutions for dealing with the contaminated water accumulating daily.
The port town of Minami-Sanriku on Japan's northeastern coast is nearly wiped out, and in the area near there, authorities now fear 10,000 people may be dead. When the ominous Black Sea attacked this island nation Friday, it left behind a massive trail of destruction that is getting worse by the hour. An oil refinery in the quake zone is simply being left to burn down. There's nobody to fight the fire. Entire towns are flattened, others still smoldering. Most roads in coastal areas now useless. Nothing, not cars, not boats.
While the world's attention focused on Fukushima, a silent transformation swept across Japan's eastern coast. Towns that had stood for centuries were erased in moments. And as rescue efforts began, survivors emerged to find a country they no longer recognized. In Rikuzen, Takata, a city of 23,000, barely a handful of buildings remain standing. Ishinomaki, the hardest hit city, bore witness to unimaginable loss. The tsunami had penetrated up to 10 kilometers inland, turning vast swaths of fertile farmland into saltwater marshes. The numbers told a story of unprecedented devastation. Official figures reported 19,759 deaths, 6,242 injured, and 2,553 missing. Over 340,000 people found themselves displaced, their homes and livelihoods swept away. The economic toll was staggering. An estimated 230,000 vehicles were damaged or destroyed. In Iwate, Miyagi, and Fukushima prefectures alone, 15,000 cars were deemed beyond repair. But amid the chaos and devastation, an even more startling revelation came to light. Japan was no longer where it used to be. Literally, portions of eastern Japan had shifted by as much as 2.4 meters closer to North America. A 400-kilometer stretch of coastline had dropped vertically by 0.6 meters. As Japan began the long process of rebuilding, it faced a stark reality. The disaster had left nearly 25 million tons of debris in its wake. The road to recovery would be long and arduous, but it would also reshape Japan's approach to disaster preparation for generations to come. The 2011 Japan earthquake and tsunami reshaped our understanding of worst-case scenarios in profound ways. It exposed the limitations of historical data in predicting natural disasters and forced a global reassessment of disaster preparedness strategies.
It was now only a matter of time before the fuel would melt through into the open, spewing out much worse levels of radiation.
Japan's recovery in the years since has been a testament to human resilience. Communities have rebuilt. Innovations in disaster-resistant architecture have emerged, and a renewed focus on emergency response has taken hold. But will it be enough if another disaster of this magnitude strikes again? And if it does, how can we be better prepared?